You also talk about Saddam Hussein's billions and the power of North Korea's Kim Jong-il. Could you explain?
Yeah, offshore, if you look at these crises, offshore is always a part of the story. It's never the whole story. You can always point to other factors in, the corruption of a country or economic crisis, but offshore is always a huge part of the story. And you've had in these debt crises, you have had huge lending to developing countries, and the rulers in these countries and the ruling elites are able to appropriate this money, the money that comes in from borrowing, and they take it offshore, and you have countries left saddled with debts. Recent studies have indicated, in Africa at least, that the private assets, the assets held by Africans, far exceed the debts of African countries. The difference is that the assets are held in private hands. These are assets offshore in banks overseas. They could easily pay off the debts. The income on those assets could easily pay off, all the debt repayments. But we have this mismatch, and the burden is the debts are borne by the African people in the form of either higher taxes for themselves or degraded public services, and an elite that benefits from complete impunity for what they're doing. The money's offshore. There's nothing that anybody can do about it, and this leads to the corruption of countries and wholesale subversion of democracy. So it's an absolute scourge on developing countries. Global Financial Integrity, which is a Washington think tank, in January estimated that illicit financial flows out of developing countries in 2008 added up to $1.2 trillion into tax havens and rich world economies. A lot of that came here into the United States. A lot of Latin American money comes here. And so the United States itself is a tax haven. The United States has a kind of two-faced problem. One is that it's losing money to foreign tax havens, but also it is itself offering secrecy facilities, offering tax-free treatment to foreigners who bring their money here and helping foreigners evade taxes and commit crimes. And one of the great arguments in my book is that this money that's coming in does not make up for the money being lost. Instead, it causes harm. It further puffs up wasteful property bubbles, further puffs up Wall Street, and has contributed even more to this, too big to fail problem, the problem of financial capture of the political process. So we have a double, the inflow problem and the outflow problem, both being harmful for the United States, but also for the developing countries.
So what do you think, how should this change? I mean, you have this enormous emphasis on the deficit in this country. You say that offshore tax evasion has cost the United States $100 billion a year. How can we turn this around?
Well, as I said, the $100 billion I see as just one part of the picture. I think that there is some legislation that is coming in to try and crack down on this stuff. There was a bill originally co-sponsored by Barack Obama before he was president, and now it has not yet passed through. But Senate 11, I believe, it's called the Stop Tax Haven Abuse Act. Senate 11 is, I believe, trying to reintroduce this. There is no magic bullet that is going to solve this problem, but there are a series of different measures that can be and need to be taken. And the first thing that really has to be done is for people to start to see how big and bad this system has become. While people think it's just a few islands out in the Caribbean doing a little bit of tax evasion, I'm not saying $100 billion is just a little bit of tax evasion, but while people still see it as a problem just on that scale, there won't be the political momentum for reform. One of my central arguments is this is so much bigger and so much badder than almost anybody knows. We need to, as a first step for reform, we need to understand that and spread the message.
Well, I mean, you say it was President Obama who was pushing this as senator, but it's the same President Obama who is trying to raise $1 billion in 2012. What would you say is the single most powerful force that is stopping any kind of crackdown on this?
Well, I think, of course, Wall Street banks and financial institutions, which are huge fans of the offshore system, multinational corporations are able to use the offshore system particularly through tax avoidance, sending their money offshore, not getting taxed on it until they bring the money back home. So they are huge proponents of this system. So corporate lobbying power is also a huge part of the problem. Another part of the problem is that there is this kind of self-reinforcing dynamic of the offshore system. When one country cuts its tax rates, its corporation taxes, or creates a new loophole, others in the game, which are tax havens, which have a business model of being tax havens, then feel they have to keep up, and they think, okay, we've got to create an even better loophole. When one country creates a very strong form of secrecy, the other countries will say, we've got to create an even stronger form. So you have this kind of race to the bottom. And one of the big effects from a tax point of view, and this also happens with financial regulation, but from a tax point of view, what you will get is the tax charge on mobile capital, which is very often the form of how wealthy people and corporations receive their income and how they're taxed. The tax charge on mobile capital falls. That means somebody else has to pay for those taxes that aren't being paid by the wealthy people and corporations. So other people have to pick up the slack. So you get a kind of compression of the tax system because of this dynamic. So you get ordinary people having to pay more in order to pay the taxes that the wealthier people are not paying. And this is a kind of impersonal dynamic that is inherent to the offshore system. And one thing that is especially required to deal with that is international cooperation. And I think the United States can take a lead, a global lead, and should take a global lead on getting cooperation on this kind of problem that is part of the offshore system.
And it isn't part of the problem that any talk of reform has to run up against the fact that the international banking system, to one degree or another, benefits from the entire situation of these tax havens? Because I would assume that the money is always held in banks, whether it's in the United States or in England or in these other countries. And I would assume that the banks that help facilitate this kind of avoidance or evasion end up with bigger fees as a result of their extra assistance to the holders of these accounts, so that in essence the banking system doesn't want to see this changed.
No, I think that's probably fairly true to say. We should not estimate also the lobbying power of the accounting firms. That's something that people don't really consider. Of course, the banks are huge. The accounting firms, the legal firms that are involved in this are absolutely enormous. I think one of the things that could be done is to look at ways of having much more severe penalties on people who assist, particularly criminal tax evasion and other aspects of it. But we also mustn't lose sight of the financial regulation aspect of this. And when countries like the United Kingdom, but other tax havens like Luxembourg, Ireland, the Netherlands, which are not traditionally regarded as tax havens, but they're huge players in this business, we must increasingly recognize them as engaging in what is nothing short of economic warfare against the United States and other countries. We really need to start recognizing that this is, this is conflict. This is economic conflict. When one country tries to suck tax revenue or illicit flows or whatever out of another country, that is an aggressive act, and we need to start taking much more robust action to defend all of our countries against what's going on in the offshore system.
Nicholas, very quickly as we wrap up, the two powers, corporate power and grassroots power. On the corporate side, you have people like Rupert Murdoch, who determines much of the debate in this country with his ownership of media. You call him a master of offshore gymnastics. And then you've got the grassroots movements, Uncut, both in Britain and the United States, this growing movement that's going after tax avoiders. Talk about both. Start with Rupert Murdoch.
Okay, Rupert Murdoch. Now, the last investigation into his tax affairs I'm aware of is one conducted by The Economist in, I think, 1998 or 1999. So we don't have very updated data on him, but he had cut his tax rate down to 6%. When others were paying, much higher rates. A recent Government Accountability Office report in 2008 estimated that News Corporation has 152 offshore subsidiaries, according to their definition of tax havens. So he is certainly a big player in the game. And when you have, he's obviously not the only media player using offshore tax havens. It's very widespread. But when you have big players in the game defending this, then you have a big problem from the media point of view as well. On the grassroots side, this is incredibly heartening what's been happening. There has been, until I would say a year ago, almost complete radio silence on this issue. Very few people were taking an interest in it. We have seen the Uncut movement is something that emerges, a spontaneous protest against corporate tax avoidance. In my country, in the UK, where there's big spending cuts happening, people turning around and saying, how come we're giving these effective subsidies to corporations, these tax subsidies to corporations, and now we're having to cut schools and hospitals, and people are coming out onto the streets, and this is absolutely new, and this is thrilling to see, and it's happening in the United States, and stories such as General Electric's ability to get away with paying no tax in the United States is a catalyst for something. So something very new is happening now, and it's tremendously refreshing. And this is the beginning, I believe, of something much bigger that will, as austerity and deficits continue to bite, will get more people onto the streets.
We have video of the protesters, the uncut folks in the United States, holding up Treasure Islands, your book. Nicholas Jackson, we want to thank you very much for being with us, author of Treasure Islands, uncovering the damage of offshore banking and tax havens. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. When we come back, as we move into Earth Day next week, we're going to talk about what is happening in the world. We'll speak with the author of Hot. Stay with us. What If We All Stop Paying Taxes by Sarah Jones and the Dap Kings, and a special shout out to our friends from Essex County College who are here watching Democracy Now! Today in the greenest TV, radio, internet studios in the country as we broadcast on more than 900 stations. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
We turn now to the latest on climate change and the budget. Last night, Congress approved cutting $1.6 billion from the budget of the Environmental Protection Agency, a 16% reduction. The budget deal also cuts funding for a planned climate desk within the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and eliminates the position of Assistant to the President for Energy and Climate Change. Ever since winning control of the House, Republican lawmakers have taken a number of steps to curtail the Obama administration's efforts to deal with climate change. The attack on climate change science began in January, when House Republicans shuttered the Select Committee for